In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars, they chose the wrong person to provoke, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. The sun had barely risen over the jagged horizon of Dis Creek when they found her broken, bloodied, and barely breathing. The cracked soil beneath her soaked up the crimson spill of life, and the scorched air carried no witnesses but the crows. She was a name they wouldn't remember, a face they'd mocked with laughter as they rode off into the dawn, thinking they'd buried more than just a body. But they were wrong. Her name was Calla Rains, and she would survive. The desert didn't pity her, but it offered silence. That silence cradled her as she clawed her way to the edge of the gulch. Half conscious, her left arm useless and her right leg dragging like dead weight. Every breath tasted like rust and ash, but she held onto them anyway. Calla didn't know how long she crawled. She only remembered the way the wind whispered through the canyon like voices of the long dead, telling her to keep going. When she finally collapsed at the feet of a wandering Mustang, the animal snorted. Startled, the rider atop him swung down before the dust could settle. Boots hit the earth. A pair of calloused hands brushed blood-matted hair from her eyes. He was tall, his features half hidden beneath the brim of a weather-beaten hat. The shadow cast over her face should have been intimidating, but his eyes told a different story. Easy now, he murmured, voice low and rich like aged whiskey. Ain't nobody gonna hurt you again. She couldn't answer. Her throat was dry as sandpaper, and her vision swam with shadows. But she remembered his scents of darwood and smoke. The man scooped her into his arms, careful as a prayer, and turned toward the distant ridge. It would be weeks before she could speak, even longer before she could walk, and longer still before she told him her story. Until then, he only knew her as the woman who refused to die. His name was Elijah Boone, and though she didn't know it yet, he'd been waiting for her his whole life. The town of Brimstone Hollow wasn't on any map. It sat like a forgotten thought at the edge of nowhere, where dust devils danced and the law came on foot, if at all. Folks there didn't ask questions unless you had whiskey or money, and sometimes not even then. Elijah owned a ranch a few miles east, where the land stretched wide and wild. It was the kind of place people went to forget. He'd built it himself after the war, plank by bloody plank, far from the echoes of cannon fire and screams. He never expected company. The girl in his bed barely breathed for 3 days. Fever burned her skin, and nightmares twisted her sleep into violent spasms. But Elijah stayed by her side, feeding her broth, changing bandages, reading aloud from the one book he owned that wasn't a Bible. On the 4th night, her eyes opened, clear, sharp, and brimming with something between terror and fury. "You're safe," he said again, just like he'd said every night. "Ain't no one gonna find you here." "Name?" she rasped. "Elijah. Elijah Boone." She blinked, swallowed. Her lips cracked open again. Calla. It was a beginning. The first time she tried to walk again, she collapsed in the dirt, coughing blood. Elijah went to help her, but she slapped his hand away. "I ain't glass," she muttered. "Didn't say you were," he replied, folding his arms. "Then don't treat me like it." Her anger was a fire that kept her warm through the long nights. He didn't ask what had happened. Didn't need to. Her scars spoke louder than words. The way her hands trembled at sudden noises. The way she flinched when men raised their voices. The look in her eyes when she stared at the mountains, like they owed her something. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a storm-gathering strength. It was another month before she spoke of them. The outlaws who left her for dead. They called themselves the Hollow Men, she said one evening, staring into the fire. 5 of them. Thought I was just some pretty thing to pass the time. Took my horse, my money, everything. She didn't say what else they took. She didn't have to. Elijah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I memorized their faces," she added, "and one day, I'm gonna make sure they know mine." Her eyes met his then. There was no doubt in them, only fire. Elijah nodded slowly. "When that day comes, you won't face them alone." The fire popped, somewhere beyond the hills. A wolf howled, but inside the cabin, a promise was made. Calla Rains would rise, and the Hollow Men would fall. She trained in silence. Every morning, before the sun touched the valley floor, Calla was out with Elijah's old revolvers. Learning how to aim with a broken arm and a stiff leg, he watched from the porch, saying little. But sometimes she caught him smiling. She started riding again too. Her limp made mounting difficult, but she didn't complain. Not once. The Mustang Elijah gave her was mean as sin, but she tamed it into days. Called him Ghost. "You don't give up," Elijah said one night, handing her a glass of firewater. "Can't afford to." Not anymore. They sat in silence. The kind of silence that fills the spaces between people rather than empties them. And then, one night, everything changed. A stranger rode into Brimstone Hollow. Said he was looking for someone. Said her name was Calla. His name was Miles Granger. And his boots stirred the dust like he owned the road beneath him. The kind of man who always smiled, but never showed his teeth when he stepped off his horse. In front of the saloon, the locals went quiet. He pushed the batwing doors open and scanned the dim room. One slow step after another, he approached the bar and laid a silver coin down. "Name's Miles. I'm looking for a woman by the name of Calla Rains. Heard she might be out this way." The bartender's hands hesitated just long enough to give him away. Miles's smile sharpened. "She's here, somewhere, and I got business with her." Word traveled fast in a place like Brimstone Hollow. By the time Elijah saddled Ghost and rode into town, the saloon was empty save for one man sipping his drink, a folded wanted poster beside him. Elijah dismounted slowly, his frame casting a long shadow as he stepped through the saloon doors. Calla was not a woman easily shaken, but when she saw Miles Granger ride out the next morning with a smirk and a trail of dust, she knew her time. And hiding was over. She returned to the cabin and told Elijah everything about Miles, about the Hollow men, about the night they took everything, and about the fire inside her that hadn't dimmed since. They spent that night in silence again, but it was different now, because vengeance had a name, and he had found her. End of part 2. His name was Miles Granger, and his boots stirred the dust like he owned the road beneath him. The kind of man who always smiled but never showed his teeth. When he stepped off his horse in front of the saloon, the locals went quiet. He pushed the batwing doors open and scanned the dim room. One slow step after another, he approached the bar and laid a silver coin down. "Name's Miles. I'm looking for a woman by the name of Calla Rains. Heard she might be out this way." The bartender's hands hesitated just long enough to give him away. Miles's smile sharpened. "She's here, somewhere, and I got business with her." Word traveled fast in a place like Brimstone Hollow. By the time Elijah saddled Ghost and rode into town, the saloon was empty save for one man sipping his drink, a folded wanted poster beside him. Elijah dismounted slowly, his frame casting a long shadow as he stepped through the saloon doors. Calla was not a woman easily shaken, but when she saw Miles Granger ride out the next morning with a smirk and a trail of dust, she knew her time. And hiding was over. She returned to the cabin and told Elijah everything about Miles, about the Hollow men, about the night they took everything, and about the fire inside her that hadn't dimmed since. They spent that night in silence again, but it was different now, because vengeance had a name, and he had found her. Miles Granger didn't ride far after leaving Brimstone Hollow. He stopped just over the ridge, where the town couldn't see, and waited for the vultures. Not the feathered kind though, those circled overhead like omens. No, Miles was waiting for the men who followed shadows, for the other Hollow men. He didn't wait long. Within the hour, 3 riders came out of the South Pass, trailing dust behind them like wildfire smoke. They wore no colors, no marks, but Calla would have known them by the way their eyes skimmed. Everything like predators. Miles didn't dismount when they arrived. He only nodded once, flicking the reins just enough to settle his restless stallion. "Town's still soft. She's here." Or close. The man on the left was lean, sun-scarred, with fingers always twitching near his holster. His name was Shaw. The others were Beckett Brutish, with dead eyes, and Horner, quiet and mean, who never spoke when he didn't have to. Shaw spat. "Ain't this poetic? Girl lived. She ain't just alive," Miles said. "She's looking to bite. Then maybe it's time we put her down for good. Horner finally spoke. Voice like dry gravel. That's what we thought last time. They were the remnants. The three who had ridden away with Miles the night. They thought Calla Raines was just another broken toy to discard. Now they were here to make sure she stayed broken. For good. Back at the cabin, Calla stood on the porch, watching the sun burn. Low into the horizon, Elijah leaned against the railing beside her, arms folded. They're comin'. She said, I know. Could leave. Right out now. Be gone before night. You think they wouldn't follow? She didn't answer. Elijah looked sideways at her. You sure about this? Once it starts, there's no going back. Calla's jaw tensed. They already took everything from me. My name, my dignity, almost my life. I ain't giving them anything else. He studied her a moment longer, then nodded. Then we stand. They spent the night preparing. Elijah dug up old gear rifles, ammo, an old scattergun with dust in the barrel. Calla cleaned them all. Her hands, once trembling, were steady now. She lined the weapons along the cabin wall like sacred relics by morning. They had fortified the porch with sandbags and overturned barrels. The barn doors were chained. The horses moved to a gully a mile east. They turned the cabin into a fortress, and every board felt like a heartbeat waiting to thrum with war. And just as the sun crested the hilltops, Miles Granger returned. He didn't come alone. The hollow men rode at his sides, faces calm, eyes cold. Behind them, the desert stretched like a warning. The sky was too quiet. Calla stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Elijah followed her, expression unreadable. Miles raised a hand in greeting. Calla Raines. Gotta say, didn't expect to see you. Walking, guess you're bad at killing. Beckett laughed. She's got fire. Shame we're gonna have to douse it. You had your chance, Calla said. Should have finished what you started. Miles's eyes sharpened. That a threat, sweetheart? No. Elijah said flatly. That's a promise. A beat passed. Then to dot the world held its breath. Then Shaw moved. Gunfire erupted. A thunderclap in the stillness. Calla dove behind the barrels as Elijah returned fire. The porch cracked under the weight of bullets. Dust exploded from the columns. Somewhere, a window shattered. Calla aimed, breathing slow. She fired once. Beckett's horse screamed and threw him. She didn't wait to see if he got up. Elijah's scattergun barked thunder. Shaw ducked and rolled behind a boulder. Horner flanked left. Moving like a ghost, Miles stayed back, watching. Calla spotted Horner just as he crept toward the shed. She shifted, steadied her hand, and fired. The bullet caught him high in the arm. He stumbled back with a grunt. Elijah moved to cover the right flank, but a shot ripped past his shoulder. Miles had joined the fray. It lasted less than 10 minutes, but by the end, smoke drifted like mist through the yard. Horner was down, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Shaw had lost his gun and crawled under a trough. Beckett was out cold beside his spooked horse, and Miles Granger stood alone, bleeding from the thigh, aiming his revolver at Elijah. Calla emerged from behind the porch post, rifle leveled. Drop it. Miles grinned, blood in his teeth. You gonna shoot me in the back again? You shot first. You ain't no killer, Calla. That's what made you fun. That's what made you weak. Her hands didn't tremble. You're right. I wasn't. She pulled the trigger. The shot wasn't fatal, but it took Miles off his feet. He dropped his gun and clutched his leg, screaming. Elijah stepped forward, picked up the revolver, and holstered it. You got two options. Ride out of here, or get buried under that cottonwood. Miles spat, grimacing. You think this is over, Calla? Knelt beside him. Her voice was cold as stone. For you, it is. She stood, turned, and walked inside. Elijah stayed long enough to make sure the hollow men could walk. He left their horses tied, their weapons scattered. Let the desert decide if they made it out. He found Calla inside, sitting at the table, breathing hard but steady. You okay? He asked. She looked up, fire dimmed but not gone. I will be. Outside, the sun climbed and the hollow men left Brimstone Hollow for the last time. For the first time in over a year, Brimstone Hollow slept through the night without ghosts. Calla stood outside the cabin, watching the sky shift from dark velvet to bleeding gold. Her rifle leaned against the porch rail, untouched. She didn't need it this morning. Not for protection. Not anymore. The hollow men were gone. At least the ones who came looking. Their blood had dried into the dirt, their curses carried off by desert winds. Miles Granger's wounded pride limped somewhere, across the flats, to broken to ever return. And yet, Calla didn't feel triumphant. Not the way she thought she would. Elijah stepped out beside her, a tin cup steaming in his hand. He offered it silently. She took it. Their fingers brushed. His warmth lingered. "You get any sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Me neither." They drank in silence. The coffee was strong, bitter, the kind that made you remember things you'd rather forget. "There'll be more," she said finally. "Men like that. Someone will come asking what happened." Elijah nodded. "Always someone who thinks they can do it better. Then I need to be better." He looked over at her, measuring her words. "You're already more than they ever were." Calla didn't smile. She wasn't ready for that yet. But she didn't flinch either. That was something. The town hadn't changed much since the shootout. A few new bullet holes in the saloon's siding. A few new whispers floating around the post office. But folks in Brimstone Hollow had long memories and longer silences. They didn't speak of what they saw, but they remembered who stood when the fire came. Calla walked through the center of town 3 days later like a woman reborn. Hat tilted low, boots coated in dust. She didn't carry her rifle. She didn't have. 2 men stepped aside. Women nodded. The old barkeep gave her a drink without charge. Respect was its own kind of justice. She went to the general store and bought new rounds, to the blacksmith to sharpen her knife, and finally to the telegraph office. Elijah had offered to ride with her. She declined. She needed to do this part alone. The wire operator raised a brow when she entered. "Need a message sent." She pulled a slip of paper from her coat pocket. The ink was smudged, but still legible. 3 names, an old location, and a single line. "I'm still alive." She handed it to him. "Send it, eastbound, to Larkspur Station." He looked at her. "That's a long way off. So's memory. But it still travels." She returned to the cabin before nightfall. Elijah had the lantern lit, dinner cooking over the fire. He didn't ask what the message said. Didn't have to. He saw it in her eyes. "They were never gonna stop," she said. "But you will." Calla stirred the stew. Her movements were calm now, unhurried, like she'd earned the right to slow down. "They took a piece of me," she said. "Not just once. Every day I didn't fight back, they took another inch. I sent that wire because there's one left, one that never showed his face again, one I didn't see the night it happened. But I remember his voice. I remember his laugh." Elijah ladled food into bowls. "You want help finding him?" "No. If I hunt him, I stay in the past. If he comes here, I end it. That's the deal." He nodded. "Fair deal." They ate quietly, outside. Coyotes howled beneath a silver moon. Inside, peace wrapped itself around her ribs like armor. A week passed, then another. Calla started fixing the fence by the pasture. Elijah taught her to mend leather, how to set a trap line, how to check for water in the high rocks. She learned fast, not because she was desperate, but because she was building something now. A life not defined by scars. She still woke in the night sometimes, drenched in sweat. But the fear didn't paralyze her anymore. She reached for her knife, touched the hilt, and remembered she wasn't that girl anymore. The girl who'd begged for mercy, who'd been left in the dirt. That girl had died, and Calla Raines had taken her place. One afternoon, Elijah handed her a small box. "Found this in the barn. Meant to give it to you sooner." She opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver chain, its pendant shaped like a hawk. "It belonged to my sister," he said. "She wore it the day I left for the war. Said a hawk always knows where the sky begins." Calla swallowed hard. "Why give it to me?" "Because you never forgot where to look, even when the sky disappeared." She didn't speak, just reached out and touched his hand. They didn't talk about love, not in those words, but the silence between them changed, grew warmer, softer. He started sleeping in the chair beside her bed, then on the floor nearby, then, finally, beside her. He didn't ask. She didn't need him to. Sometimes healing didn't come with grand gestures. Sometimes it came with coffee, with a hawk-shaped pendant, with the quiet presence of someone who never left. Then, the message came, a writer from the telegraph office. Brought it, dusty, wide-eyed, held out the envelope like it might bite. Calla took it with steady hands. Inside, one name, one town. He was a live dot, and he'd written back. The town was called Larkspur, nestled deep in the eastern pines, where the air smelled of wet bark and something older, heavier. Calla stared at the name on the page again. Even though she'd read it 10 times already, it wasn't the town that haunted her. It was the name written in that sharp, slanted scrawl that stabbed like a knife pulled from an old wound. Jonas Creed. She hadn't spoken his name aloud in years, hadn't dared, even in the thickest nights of sweat-drenched sleep, when her mind screamed and her hands bled from gripping the sheets. She refused to let it pass her lips. Because to name it was to remember, and to remember was to hurt. But the message had arrived, signed, sealed, and just shy of a confession. She's alive. Come find me. I need to explain. Calla folded the paper and tucked it beneath the hawk pendant resting on her chest. Her hands were calm. Her eyes weren't. Elijah said nothing when she told him. He didn't offer advice, didn't warn or console. He just stood there by the corral fence, watching Ghost paw at the dirt like he sensed what was coming. You sure? He asked finally. No. But I have to. Want me to come? She shook her head. If this turns out how I think, you shouldn't be anywhere near it. He nodded once, slowly. The kind of nod a man gives when he wants to argue but knows better. She mounted Ghost. Saddle already packed, bedroll strapped tight. 3 days there, she said. I'll be back by week's end. He didn't ask her to promise. He just watched her ride until the ridge swallowed her whole. Larkspur was quieter than she expected. No outlaws lounging by saloon doors, no squint-eyed drifters sizing her up, just families tending chickens, boys fishing, women hanging wash in the soft summer wind. It was a place untouched by the kind of violence that wrote its name in blood, which made it all the stranger that Jonas Creed lived. Here, Calla asked no one for directions. She didn't need to. Her memory walked her down streets she'd never set foot on. Every building, every tree felt familiar, like déjà vu soaked in dread. She found his house on the edge of town. A 2-story rancher with white shutters and a porch swing that creaked. When the wind got bold, it looked good, settled, like the man inside had earned peace. Calla dismounted slowly. Her boots crunched the gravel. Each step scraped against the edge of old rage. Then the door opened. And there he was. Jonas Creed. Older now, grayer, a limp in his right leg, barely noticeable unless you were looking. She noticed. He froze when he saw her. The smile died on his lips like a candle in a draft. Calla, she didn't speak. I wasn't sure you'd come. Still, she said nothing. Jonas stepped forward. There's a lot you don't know. What happened that night? Don't. Her voice landed between them like a stone. He stopped. You wrote me. I came. That's the end of what you get to assume. Jonas lowered his head. Fair enough. Comin', please. Just hear me. She hesitated, then stepped past him into the house. It smelled like pine wood and clean linen. Nothing sinister. No shadows curled in the corners. But Calla didn't sit. Jonas poured a drink with hands that shook slightly. He didn't drink it, just held it. You remember the night I left? He asked. Calla stared at him. I remember the night you didn't. Stop them. Jonas winced. I tried. God, Calla, I tried. But I wasn't like them. I didn't think it would go that far. I thought if I stayed quiet, I could keep them from going worse. You were their leader. Not anymore. Not then. Miles had taken over. Beckett, Shaw, the rest. They stopped listening to me. But you stayed. He nodded. Slowly, the silence between them pulsed. I was a coward. I know that. I watched them drag you away, and I froze. I thought if I spoke up, they'd kill me too. And after they left you, I couldn't look at myself anymore. So I disappeared. Calla's jaw tightened. I wanted to believe you'd died, because that made it easier. But when I heard rumors you were alive, something inside me snapped. I had to know. You sent a wire. You didn't come. Would you have let me near you if I had? Calla didn't answer. He moved to the window. looked out over the hills like the past might come riding over them. I never touched you, not once, not like they did. But I let it happen. I didn't stop it. And I've lived with that every day. Calla finally sat. I used to think forgiveness was weakness. She said, a gift you gave someone who didn't earn it. And now, she looked up. Now I think forgiveness is something you give yourself, so you don't have to carry someone else's shame. Jonas turned. So, are you here to forgive me? She stood, stepped close. No, I came to tell you I remember every word, every scream, every time you turned away. I came to let you see what I became despite you, because you don't get to own my pain. Jonas looked like he'd been struck. And I came, she said, voice steady, to tell you that if I ever hear you're still calling yourself innocent, still acting like you were just another bystander, I'll return, and I won't come to talk. Then she turned, walked to the door. Calla, you want peace, keep your head down, stay forgotten, that's your mercy. She mounted Ghost before the swing had even creaked again. She didn't stop until the trees gave way to open plains, didn't breathe fully until the wind touched her face like an old friend. And for the first time in her life, the past wasn't chasing her. It was behind her, where it belonged. It took Calla 3 days to ride home, not because of the distance, but because she stopped often, not out of fear or exhaustion, but contemplation. She spent hours by lonely streams or beneath wide cottonwoods, letting her mind unspool. For the first time since that night, there was space inside her chest that didn't feel caged. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just breathed, and with every breath, the burden of Jonas Creed's cowardice slipped further from her shoulders. When she crested the hill overlooking the cabin, the first light of morning kissed the roof like a welcome home. The wind stirred, the grass in gentle waves, and in the corral, Elijah stood, his hat off, watching her ride in. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't have to. She dismounted, boots hitting the earth with a new certainty. He stepped forward. You look different. I am. They didn't speak again for a long time. Instead, he took Ghost's reins and led the horse to water while she unpacked her saddle. Everything about the day felt quieter, clearer. They ate breakfast on the porch, the silence between them steady, like to rocks with the same wind brushing their faces. When she finally reached for his hand, her touch didn't tremble. It grounded. It chose. A letter arrived 2 weeks later. It came by way of a southbound courier. An older man with calloused hands and a long scar over one brow. He tipped his hat to Elijah, passed the sealed envelope to Calla, and left without a word. She opened it carefully. The handwriting wasn't Jonas's. It was Miles Granger's. Her breath stilled. Calla, you think the past dies when you stop chasing it. You're wrong. You wounded me, girl. But you didn't end me. And I wasn't alone that night. There are others. You remember them if you try hard enough. Names buried deep, faces in the dark. I've found one. He remembers you too. He wants to meet. Tell Elijah hello. Miles P.S. Bring your gun. She set the letter down slowly. What is it? Elijah asked. He's alive. I figured. Men like him don't bleed easy. He's stirring the ashes now, looking to see if any embers bite back. Calla's hands clenched in her lap. He's baiting me. And are you taking it? She didn't answer. Not yet. They spent the next day reinforcing the property. Not in panic, not even in caution, just as preparation. Would stack tighter, locks rechecked. Sight lines cleared of overgrowth. Calla ray-oiled. Her rifles. Elijah cleaned the scattergun, the sound of metal, and would fill the long hours. But no fear passed between them. If anything, there was understanding. If Miles wanted to revisit hell, they'd light the road for him. That night, she found Elijah by the fire, his journal open. You writing? Just notes, map routes, some thoughts. In case we need to ride. You think they'll come here? He looked at her, eyes steady. I think it's a matter of when. Then we don't wait. He arched a brow. You want to go to them, not them, him. The one he found. The one from that night I never saw. Elijah's mouth set in a hard line. You said if he came here, you'd end it. You sure you're ready to go looking again? Calla sat beside him. Her voice didn't waver. This isn't about revenge. Not anymore. This is about taking my story back. He nodded. Then we ride at first light. They left the cabin before dawn, packed light, rode hard. The letter had no return address. But Miles was clever, too clever to put a name without a trail. Elijah had contacts, old war riders who knew where ghosts drifted these days. It took 2 days and one very tense conversation with a man named Barrett who smelled of moonshine and regret. But they got a name: Langley, a mining settlement clinging to the edges of the Silvercut Mountains. Lawless, small, the kind of place men went to disappear or to be found when someone really wanted them. Calla didn't speak much on the ride. She thought of Miles, of his voice in the letter. He remembered you two. She didn't want to know who. She needed to see for herself. Langley looked like every story whispered in the back of a saloon. A cluster of shacks around a half-dead well, one saloon, one blacksmith, one brothel, and a sheriff's office that hadn't seen a badge in years. They rode in slow, heads turned, the kind of stares that weighed you, measured your worth in scars and grit. Calla dismounted first. A boy couldn't be more than 16, spit into the dust and nodded at her. You looking for someone, maybe, tall. Fella, scar on his lip, came into Day's back. Calla froze. The boy grinned. He's in there, room above the saloon. Don't know his name, don't ask, either. But he paid in gold. She tossed him a coin. Don't follow. The boy snatched it midair and vanished. Elijah tied the horses. I'll cover the back. Calla nodded and stepped into the saloon. It smelled like rotgut and gunpowder. She climbed the stairs slowly, heart thudding not from fear but from purpose. Each step up was a step deeper into her past, into the night she tried for so long to leave behind. She reached the door, paused, then knocked once. Silence. Then the sound of boots on floorboards. The door opened. He was older, grayer, but she knew. The voice the moment it broke the silence. Well, damn, you're alive. Calla stared into the eyes of the man who had laughed while she bled, the one whose face she never saw, but whose voice had carved its name into her nightmares. You remember me? He asked. Calla's hand went to her sidearm. I never forgot. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't even step back. He just grinned. Slow and crooked. You gonna shoot me now or hear what I got to say? Calla stepped into the room. Start talking. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. He leaned back against the bedpost, arms crossed, a man without fear or shame. The room smelled of stale tobacco and sweat, and sunlight leaked through the warped slats of the window, striping the wooden floor like prison bars. Calla didn't sit. She didn't blink. She stood there with her hand resting just above her holster, still as a church bell before a funeral. The man shrugged. I figured you'd come eventually. She stared at him. Didn't expect you to show alone. I'm not alone. A soft thump echoed from below. Elijah, moving beneath the saloon, watching, waiting. The man laughed. Still got company, huh? You always did attract the soft-hearted types. Calla's voice dropped, flat and controlled. What's your name? He smiled wider, showing crooked teeth. So you still don't remember. Interesting. Thought maybe you just wanted to forget. I didn't see your face that night. I only heard you, laughing, whispering. You held me down. He raised his eyebrows, expression unfazed. You think you're the only one that night. You weren't. You were just the one that fought the hardest. Her fingers twitched. Name, Dixon, he said. Elias Dixon. The name didn't hit like a bullet. It landed more like a shovel to the stomach. Calla exhaled slowly. Thought maybe you'd come here to kill me, Dixon said. But I reckon if that was the plan, I'd already be dead. So what's this then? Closure, a sermon. You want me to beg. I want to understand why. He scoffed. Why? You don't get it, girl. There wasn't a why. You were a game, a dare. An ugly little part of our world. We were monsters, and you were meat. It was Tuesday. She stepped forward. Just once. Say that again. His grin faltered. Calla, say it again. He didn't. She stepped closer still. You know what I remember, she said, voice colder than winter creek water. I remember the boots, scuffed leather, blood on the toe. I remember the way your hand shook when I bit you, right here. She pointed to the space between his thumb and forefinger. There's probably still a scar, Let me see it. He glanced down. Just enough that she moved before he could blink. Her hand snapped out, grabbed his wrist, and twisted. The scar was there, pale and jagged, just like she remembered. Dixon yelped as she shoved him back into the bed frame. Her other hand went to her revolver. I told myself I wasn't coming here to kill you, but that was before you opened your mouth. You ain't law, he hissed. You shoot me, that's murder. No, she said, that's mercy. A beat passed. Another dot, then a knock on the window shutter. Elijah. She took a breath, lowered her weapon. You're going to stay here, she said. You're not going to move. Not until I'm gone. And if I hear even a whisper that you're back to your old ways, if I so much as smell your stink on another town's breeze. She leaned in until her breath touched his cheek. I'll come back, and I'll bury you with the others. Then she turned, walked out, down the stairs, through the saloon, out into the daylight. Elijah waited beside the horses. It done? Calla swung into her saddle. No, but it's over. They rode in silence for miles. Back at the cabin, the days settled like dust. Calla spent the mornings tending the fences, riding the ridges, clearing the trails. Elijah cleaned the tools, patched the roof, stacked the firewood higher than it had ever been. Some nights they talked, some they didn't, but the quiet was no longer heavy. It was theirs. But peace, as always, had a price. It came 2 weeks later. A woman, alone, ridden hard, bleeding from the shoulder, her dress torn. She collapsed in the dirt near the well before Calla or Elijah could get to her. They brought her inside, cleaned her wounds, wrapped the gash tight with linen. Her name was Grace. Her eyes were sunken with exhaustion, but her voice was clear. He's coming, she said. Not Miles, someone worse. Elijah leaned forward. Worse how? Name's Preacher Hale, calls himself a man of God, runs a crew of men who burn towns and brand women, says he's cleansing the territories, said I was. Next, Calla's blood ran cold. Where did you come from? Willow Bend, or what's left of it. Calla had heard of Willow Bend, a small place, good people, gone now, and he's coming here? If he saw my trail, yes. Elijah looked at Calla. This ain't a ghost from your past. No, she said. It's a new storm. They got to work. Grace slept, rested, ate like someone who hadn't seen food in a week. Calla sharpened every blade in the house. Every trap was reset. Every weak spot along the porch reinforced. Elijah cleaned both shotguns, laid out his old war rifle, the one he hadn't used in years, and as the sun sank on the 4th night, Calla watched the horizon burn gold. He calls himself a preacher, she said. That means he wants to be seen, wants a following. He won't come in quiet. Elijah nodded. Then we light a fire he can't put out. They stood side by side, not just waiting, but ready for whatever came next. It began with smoke, thin at first, drifting like mist from the southern ridge, barely visible through the afternoon glare. But Calla knew the shape of a burning town. She'd seen it before, what it looked like when homes turned to cinders and lives turned to silence. Grace stood on the porch beside her, one arm wrapped in fresh linen. Her voice came like a whisper. He's here. Elijah didn't need to be told. He'd been watching the hills since dawn, his rifle within reach, hat low over his eyes. He spat once, then nodded. Preacher Hale. Calla rested a hand on her revolver. How many did you say ride with him? Grace hesitated. Last I counted, 15, maybe more, all armed, all touched like they don't see blood the same way we do, like they've forgotten how to blink. Calla looked out at the valley, at the dirt road that curled like a lazy snake from the ridge. Then we remind them, the cabin wasn't a fortress, but it had its strengths. They dug trenches around the barn, reinforced the chicken coop walls with timber, moved water barrels into cover. Elijah cut kill zones into the brush with a saw and grit. Calla marked every approach line with rock signals and distance markers. Grace helped where she could. Her wound slowed her, but not her mind. She knew where to hide supplies, how to build distractions, how to set snares. Elijah nodded at her more than once with respect. You ever soldier? No, she replied, but I learned from someone who did. They waited. And waited. The next morning, The smoke was closer. By dusk, they heard hooves. Elijah crouched by the fence line with his war rifle. Calla stayed inside with Grace, shotgun by the door, Colt on her hip. Night fell in slow motion, and with it came the sound of hymns, not the kind you heard in a church. Low and droning, like thunder on the edge of sleep, dozens of voices rising and falling in eerie unison, words they couldn't make out, but the melody, if you could call it that, curled like a snake through the pines. Calla's spine stiffened. What the hell is that? Grace swallowed. It's him. He sings before he burns. Then the torches appeared. 15 riders, maybe more, all dressed in worn coats, broad-brimmed hats, every face painted with soot or ash. Some had scars, others tattoos. All of them bore symbols, crosses carved into their coats, red bands around their arms, ropes tied like nooses around their waists. They stopped 50 yards out, didn't speak, didn't move, until one stepped forward. Preacher Hale. Tall, lean, bearded like a prophet, dressed in black from boots to collar, with a white scrap of cloth tied around his throat like a reverse noose. He carried no weapon, only a Bible. He raised it with both hands high above his head. "Come forth, children of sin. Judgment rides with me." Calla stepped onto the porch, shotgun across her arm. "You're not welcome here." Hale smiled. "No soul is unwelcome in the eyes of God, even the fallen. This isn't a sermon, it's a warning. Turn around." The preacher lowered the Bible. "You shelter the girl, the one marked, the one whose sin bled over my men." He looked past Calla, right at Grace. She escaped his fire. "That cannot be allowed." Calla stepped forward. "She's under my roof. That's all you need to know. You would stand between a sinner and the flame? I would stand between your madness and my land." He took a single step closer. "Then you are lost." A crack split the night. Elijah's rifle, one of Hale's riders, dropped like a sack of flour, blood painting his chest. The torchlight swayed. The hymns faltered. Then came the silence. Then came war. They attacked like zealots, screaming scriptures, brandishing blades and clubs. Some fired guns, but many didn't, relying instead on speed and fury. Elijah shot 3 before they reached the outer trench. Calla fired once, twice, each blast from her shotgun flattening the front line. Then she switched to her revolver, moved to the window, and dropped another. Grace stayed low, moving supplies, keeping ammunition flowing, tossing flash powder traps into the brush. 2 of Hale's men ran headlong into one and screamed as fire bit through their coats. Still they came, through smoke, through screaming, through the crackle of dry grass catching flame. Calla kicked the door open and stepped out onto the porch. The world had turned red. Preacher Hale stood beyond the chaos, untouched, unmoving. She raised her revolver and fired. He didn't flinch. The bullet stopped to inches from his head. It hung there midair before dropping to the ground like a stone. Calla's mouth went dry. Hale lowered his Bible. "No weapon forged shall prosper." She fired again. Same result. He smiled, then raised his hand. One of his men lunged forward, torch high. Calla stepped back, but Elijah appeared from the side, axe swinging, and brought the man down. "He's using trick glass," Elijah shouted. "Mirrors, front and side. Ain't no sorcery, just smoke and steel." Calla looked again and saw it. Panels of polished metal strapped to Hale's chest and sides, angled to reflect. From where she'd stood, it looked like he was standing where he wasn't. An illusion. A lie. She adjusted her stance, aimed left. Fired. This time, the bullet struck flesh. Preacher Hale stumbled, blood blooming across his ribs. The hymns stopped. The riders hesitated. Then Grace stepped from the doorway, torch in hand. She threw it into the dry grass behind the invaders. Flames surged. The wind shifted, and the night became fire. By dawn, the attackers were ash. 6 escaped. Maybe no one chased them. Preacher Hale's body was never found. Only the pages of his Bible, scattered like leaves, burned along the edges. Grace wept. Not for him, for what he'd taken, what she'd survived. Elijah sat beside her, silent. Calla walked the ridge. Her land still stood. Her people still breathed. And her story still hers. That would be enough. For now. 3 weeks passed before the smoke finally stopped clinging to the wind. The flames that had scorched the valley rim were long dead, but ash still settled on the window sills every morning. Like a warning not yet withdrawn, the bodies were gone. Buried deep or burned clean, but scars remained. Grace stayed. She took to the cabin with silent devotion, cleaning, mending, cooking, sweeping the soot from corners no one else noticed. She rarely spoke of Willow Bend, but once while hanging a new set of curtains over the kitchen window, she said, "There were children." Calla didn't press. She just stepped closer and helped her stretch the fabric evenly across the sill. Elijah spent more time out past the tree line, checking traps, cutting new fence lines, clearing brush. He moved like a man who knew peace was fragile and short-lived. Calla split her days between both, but her nights belonged to memory. She dreamed of Hale sometimes, not his death, but his voice twisting scripture, promising fire. She saw him in the mirror once, too, not in flesh, but in the reflection of the water barrel, standing behind her shoulder, smiling with red-streaked teeth. She didn't flinch. She threw a stone through it. The image shattered. Then came the letter. It wasn't sealed like the last. One dot just folded, tucked under a stone on the porch, beside the old tin basin where Elijah kept extra nails. Calla found it at dawn. Written in a rushed, uneven hand. "I warned you. You should have stayed quiet." The hollow never forgets. There was no name, but she knew who had sent it. Not Miles, not Hale. Someone new, or worse, someone old. She didn't tell Elijah immediately. Instead, she rode, alone, out past the creek bed and the broken ridge where she'd first learned how to shoot with one hand and aim with two eyes. She sat in the saddle, the letter in her coat, and waited for the fear, but none came, only wind, and the soft groan of trees swaying beneath the weight of their own history. That evening, she laid the letter on the table. Grace read it, said nothing. Elijah read it, then looked up at Calla. "How many are left?" Calla tapped the edge of the letter with her finger. "I thought I knew. I counted them down like beads on a rosary. Miles, the twins, Shaw, Beckett, Jonas, Dixon, Hale, but there were others. Ones who stood behind, ones who watched, silent devils," Grace murmured. Calla nodded. "I thought the fire would cauterize the past, but some wounds open inward." Elijah leaned back. "Then we find them, one by one, and the silence, or Grace said gently, we draw them out, not with fire, not with blood, with light." They looked at her. "Tell the story," she said. "Tell the world what they did, who they were, what's left of them. Force them into the sun." Calla shook her head. "A story like that paints a target. You already have one. Might as well aim back." So they began. Not with newspapers, not with shouting. They rode into neighboring towns, 3 in a week, spoke to barkeeps, asked quiet questions, shared names, faces. The hollow men had left a trail, not just of blood, but of fear. In every saloon, someone had heard of them. There was a man named Cray, a barkeep in Duskfall. Said, big, pale eyes. He used to ride with the Red Crows, but fell in with that preacher. He used to ask about girls. In a larkspur, an old stable hand remembered. One of them had a burn on his neck, real nasty. Said it was a mark of favor. That was what he called it, favor, in Gale's Hollow. A woman with a cane whispered, "They came through here, took my sister." Never saw her again. Calla left money wherever she went. Not as payment. As apology. Back at the cabin, Grace began to write. Her letters were short, direct, addressed to small papers across the frontier. She didn't sign her name. She just called. Then the hollow letters. Within 2 weeks, whispers turned to noise. "You hear about that preacher got burned alive. They say a woman did it. One he hurt. No. They say she survived something worse." Then came the messenger. He rode up in the middle of the night, alone, tired, dusty. Calla opened the door, revolver in hand. He raised his palms. "I ain't here to fight. Name's Ryder. Got a message from someone who wants to see you. Says he knew your father. Says the Hollow took something from him too. Where? North of Dust Haven. Old rail station. Abandoned. Tomorrow night." Elijah stepped beside her. "You trust this?" "No." "Then we go together." Calla looked at Grace. She'd already begun packing bandages. They left before first light. Dust Haven was a town on its last breath. Empty buildings, hollow windows. The rail station sat on the edge like a forgotten tooth. They arrived late. The sun low, shadows long. No one waited inside. Just a fire and a single crate, marked with a painted symbol, a hollow circle. Calla stepped forward slowly, drew her knife, opened the crate. Inside bones. Human. A skull atop the pile, and a note pinned beneath its teeth. She read it aloud. For everyone you save, another dies. For every memory you bury, we dig too. We are the hollow. We never left. And we never forget. Then the fire exploded. The blast didn't take them all, but it took the walls, the roof. The rail station erupted in flame and splinters, casting Calla backward into the dust and ash. Elijah landed hard beside her, one arm thrown over his eyes. Grace, though furthest from the blast, still staggered from the shockwave, her ears ringing, blood trickling down her temple. For a second, no one moved, only the fire did, rising, reaching. Then Elijah coughed, dragged himself up, pulled Calla to her feet. You hit. She shook her head, ears ringing. That's all. They looked back at the crater that used to be the rail station. The crate, the bones, the note. Gone. Grace limped over, pressing a torn rag to her forehead. They knew we'd come. They wanted us dead, Elijah muttered. No, Calla said. They wanted us rattled. They could have waited for us inside. They didn't. They're not just trying to kill us. They're trying to scare us. Grace's eyes were sharp despite the blood. Then we make it a mistake. They rode hard out of Dust Haven. 2 hours south, they made camp under a crescent moon. No fire. Just hard bread, water, silence. Calla stared at the stars. They're not a gang anymore, she said. There's something else. An idea. A myth they're keeping alive through blood and ashes and bones, Elijah added. Grace swallowed. How many you think are left? Calla shook her head. More than I can name. Enough to make that crate a warning instead of a memorial. Then what's next? Grace asked. Calla turned. Her voice held no tremor. We end the hollow, not just the men, the name, the legacy. Burn it from history. Elijah stared at her a long time. That's a war. Calla nodded. Then we fight it like one. They rode east the next morning, toward the Black Hills, toward the borderlands where the law didn't go and legends went to rot. Elijah knew a man there, Victor Lant, former marshal, now just bones wrapped in whiskey and regret. But Victor had something better than clarity. He had records. Calla found him sleeping under a horse blanket behind a half-collapsed barn. Took to canteens of water and a slap to wake him. But when he opened his eyes and saw her, he smiled. Hell's bells, you look like your daddy. She blinked. You knew him? Rafe Rains, shot cleaner than anyone west of Junction. Killed for men in one draw once. I buried him. You buried my father. Victor sat up, groaning. Well, someone had to. Elijah stepped forward. We need names, files, anything you got on. The hollow. Victor raised an eyebrow. That old devil still breathin'? Thought y'all burned the root. They were branches, Calla said. We're after the tree. Victor scratched his chin. Follow me. He led them to a half-buried cellar behind the barn. Inside, rusted shelves held a life's worth of dust, whiskey bottles, moldy boots, and beneath a loose board 3 leather-bound ledgers. He dropped them on the table. Names, symbols, roots, movements. They were never just riders. They were messengers, movers. They ran messages for others, hid behind different coats. Calla flipped pages fast, stopped. This one, Darrow Creed. Victor nodded. Used to ride with the Bellows, smuggled flesh, traded names. Never stayed in one camp long. Creed, Calla whispered. Related to Jonas, cousin, maybe. Never could prove it. But he's worse. Slippery, smart. Elijah leaned over the page. Where'd he go? Victor pointed. Last seen south of Braxton Ridge. Mountains hide a lot. Calla nodded. Then we ride tonight. Victor touched her shoulder. You chase this deep enough, girl. You won't come out the same. I didn't survive to stay the same. They hit Braxton Ridge by nightfall 3 days later. Tired. Hungry. Numb to silence. The ridge was cold and narrow. Wind scraped the rocks like whispered warnings. Nothing lived up here. Not rabbits, not birds, just old bones and the shadows of choices gone wrong. They found the camp in a hollowed-out cave, fire low, guards dozing. Too easy. Calla approached on foot, revolver drawn. Elijah flanked left. Grace hung back, rifle braced against a stone. The moment Calla stepped into the ring of firelight, someone moved. A man, older, eyes sunken. A scar down his throat like a second. "Smile, Darrow Creed," she asked. He nodded once. "You knew Jonas. I knew worse." Calla lowered the barrel a breath. "You still ride for the Hollow." "I was the Hollow." Before they gave it a name, silence. Then Darrow leaned forward, hands open. "What if I told you I've been waiting for you?" Calla didn't move. "Why?" "Because legends die louder than men, and I want to see it end." She didn't holster her gun. "Why help me?" "Because if you don't finish it, it grows, and I've done my share of watering." Elijah stepped into view. "Then give us the roots." Darrow nodded. "There's a list, hidden under the stone altar in Hollow Chapel. Names, codes, safe houses, the whole history. Burn that, and you kill the soul." Calla's voice dropped. "What's the cost?" "Getting there. It's not just guarded, it's protected." "By who?" Darrow smiled, crooked and hollow. "By what's left of me." They didn't sleep. The next day, they rode for Hollow Chapel, where it had all begun, where it would all end. The Hollow Chapel wasn't on any map. It sat cradled in the gut of the mountains, where trails disappeared and even echoes got lost. The land was twisted there, scarred by landslides and lightning strikes. The trees grew sideways, roots tangled above the ground like veins reaching for breath, and the air smelled wrong, wet, metallic, old. Darrow led them on foot the final mile. He didn't speak, only pointed, over ridges, beneath fallen trees, through ravines slick with moss and bone-white stones. When they saw it, Calla stopped walking. It didn't look like a chapel. It looked like something buried. The stone face had been carved into the mountainside itself, arches too tall, windows too narrow, a doorway like a mouth, yawning open, rimmed in black soot. Elijah exhaled. "Hell built a church." Grace crossed herself. Darrow just said, "We go in quiet." The interior was colder than the air outside, colder than snow, like stepping into a well of forgotten things. Thus danced in the shaft of light leaking through a cracked dome above. Pews were overturned, rotted. Chains hung from stone pillars. Symbols marked the walls, painted, carved, burned. Calla didn't recognize most. One she did, the hollow circle. Darrow pointed toward the altar, beneath it. They approached cautiously, boots echoing. As they reached the altar, the air changed, thickened. The silence was wrong. Elijah knelt beside the base, found the seams. "Help me lift." He and Darrow pulled. The stone groaned, but shifted. A hollow below, and inside a chest, old wood, iron straps, locked. Calla dropped to one knee, took out her knife, wedged it under the latch. Cracked. The lid opened. Paper, dozens of ledgers, scrolls, loose sheets, names, symbols, maps, schedules. Grace stared. "This is it." Darrow nodded. "The last truth." Then the door slammed shut behind them. The sound echoed like thunder. Calla spun, gun out. Figures emerged from the shadows, not men, not entirely. Painted in soot, faces covered, eyes wide, unblinking. Some wore parts of priests' robes, others wore bone necklaces. All were silent. 10, 15, more. Calla aimed at the closest. "Move and I shoot." One stepped forward, not bigger, but heavier, like he carried a different kind of weight. His voice was gravel. "You were not invited. We're leaving with the records. The Hollow does not forgive theft." Darrow moved in front of her. "They're not thieves, they're torch bearers." The man studied Darrow. "You led them here. I'm ending what I started." Calla stepped forward. "We don't want blood, just truth. Then you'll drown in it." He raised a hand. The others rushed forward. Chaos. Elijah fired first 2 shots. Clean. Both found targets. Grace slammed the lid shut and dragged the chest toward cover. Darrow lunged at the leader. Calla spun and fired. One down. Another. Then her revolver clicked empty. She ducked, rolled. grabbed a broken pew leg and swung. Cracked. A man fell. Darrow and the leader fought in the middle of the chaos. Old rivals. Blade against fist, fury against guilt. Blood sprayed. The others didn't flinch. Elijah dropped another with his knife. Calla grabbed the scrolls from the chest, stuffed them into her coat. She grabbed the ledgers, tossed one to Grace. Go. Grace bolted toward the door, ducking and weaving. Elijah followed, covering. Calla turned to Darrow. He was losing. The leader had him by the throat. She screamed, fired her last shot. It hit the altar, exploded stone into the attacker's face. Darrow dropped. The leader screamed, clutching his eyes. Calla grabbed Darrow, dragged him. They burst through the doors, into the light. They didn't stop running for a full mile. Only when the trees thinned and the wind returned did they collapse. Darrow was bleeding badly. Leave me, he gasped. Shut up, Calla said, ripping her sleeve to bind his side. Elijah panted. Grace vomited, then stood. We have the records. Calla looked down, soaked, torn, but legible. Then we end this. They spent the next month in hiding, not from fear, from necessity. They copied everything, every name, every place. Sent pieces to newspapers, to judges, to bounty hunters. Some of the Hollow were arrested. Others ran. Some were hunted. Some were killed. But the silence ended, and with it the myth. One morning, Calla rode out alone to the spot where the rail station once stood. Now just blackened earth. She buried one of the scrolls there, burned another, left the third beneath a stone with her name carved into it. She stood, wind at her back. And whispered, You found me once. Try again. Then she turned and rode home, where Grace waited on the porch. And Elijah rocked beside her, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a hawk. Calla smiled, for the first time in years. It didn't feel like armor. It felt like truth. Spring arrived without warning. The frost receded from the hills. Buds broke through hard ground. Birds came back, filling the trees with music where once only wind had lived. Brimstone Hollow stirred again, not in fear, not in whispers, but in life. Calla had started planting. She wasn't a farmer, but the motion of it, the care it took, the waiting it gave her something the gun never had, patience. Elijah built a second room onto the cabin, said it was for supplies, but she knew it was for peace, a place to put the past where it could rest, not rot. Grace bought a printing press. No one expected it. One day she rode into Gale's Hollow, walked into a dusty shop, handed over a coin with a name no one used anymore, and came back with gears and plates and ink. The world believes what it can read, she said. Let's give it something true. By midsummer, Calla was receiving letters, some from survivors, some from bounty hunters, some from women who had buried their own stories for too long. They came with names, places, warnings. The Hollow was dying, but its ashes blew far. One name stood out, again and again. Silas Mott. Once a lawman, once a preacher, once a ghost. He'd worn a dozen faces, but all the stories ended the same. Someone disappeared, and someone else said it was the Hollow. Calla stared at the name for a long time. She didn't know if she could chase another monster, didn't know if she should. So she walked out past the new fence, into the ridge, where the wind still carried old ghosts. She stood there until dusk, until Elijah joined her. Another name, he asked. She nodded. Want me to ride with you? She hesitated. Then, softly, no. She left before dawn. Didn't say goodbye. Just packed food, bullets, 2 letters, and the hawk necklace. She rode north, toward dark valleys and unmarked trails, toward Silas. The first clue came in a town called Echo Run. Dusty place, miners and mule tracks. A man in the saloon remembered him. Preached once. Didn't use a Bible, just a knife and a mirror. Said the world needed reflection, not redemption. She moved on. Next stop, Flint Haven. A child there said he saw a man fit the drawing she carried. Gave candy to orphans. Told stories about fire. She moved on. Third place, Whisper Falls. She found the grave. It wasn't marked Silas, but the carving on the wood plank showed the hollow circle. Burned deep, fresh. She dug. There was no body, only bones. Animal, and another note. Come closer. I'll meet you at the end of the world. She returned home briefly, long enough to leave a letter for Elijah. Didn't say where she was going, only, don't follow. If I come back finished. Then she rode west to the Badlands to where the maps curled. It took 2 weeks to find the canyon. It looked like a scar, a deep slash in the land. No signs, no trails, no life. She tied her horse to a bent iron post, climbed down with a rope and prayer. At the bottom nothing, just red dust and a single stone altar, like the one from Hollow Chapel. On it, a matchbox. She opened it. Inside, a torn piece of parchment. One word, burn. Then a voice. You came farther than most. She turned. Silas Mott. Tall, pale, eyes like fog, dressed in gray, not old, not young, ageless, like grief. Calla didn't draw. You're the last. Of what? Of the beginning. He smiled. You think this is the end? It's mine. He stepped closer. You've told the world our secrets. You've scattered us. You've made us bleed. But do you know what survives every fire? Calla waited. He pointed at her heart. Belief. She drew her gun. Then believe in this. She fired. He didn't fall. He vanished. No blood. No echo. Only dust. She stood there until dawn. Then she lit the altar, watched it burn, watched it become nothing. Then she climbed back up, got on her horse, and rode east, toward home, toward firelight, toward the only truth that ever stayed. She was never theirs to bury. The trail home was different. Not shorter, not clearer, but quieter. The dust didn't cling as tight. The wind didn't howl the same. The earth felt softer, like it had let go of something it had been holding for far too long. Calla rode with silence stitched into her coat. Her mind was still in the canyon, still with the altar, still with that final word, burn. But Silas was gone, and she was not. The cabin came into view just after dusk. One lantern burned in the window. Smoke curled from the chimney. The fence was newly mended, and someone had painted the front door a deep, warm red. She dismounted slow. Her boots crunched over the gravel path. The door creaked before she could knock. Elijah stood there, holding a mug of tea like it had never left his hand since she rode out. His eyes didn't widen, didn't waver. He simply said, "You made it." Calla nodded. He didn't. Elijah stepped aside. She entered like a ghost returning to skin. Grace sat at the table, wiping ink from her fingers. The press had been moved indoors. New pages hung from lines above the hearth. Headlines, names, places, testimonies, truths. Calla scanned them. All different, all hollow, all hers. Weeks passed, then months. No writers came. No messages, no threats, just time. And life. Grace began teaching girls in town how to read. Some had names they refused to speak aloud. All of them walked a little taller leaving the house. Elijah repaired the church roof with a hammer he never named. Said building something holy didn't need prayer, just patience. Calla planted trees, fruit trees, 3 of them, one for what was taken. One for what was found, one for what still grew. She kept her guns, oiled, ready, but untouched. People asked her to speak, to ride, to write. Sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't. Not all fires needed fuel. Some needed rest, but she never lied. She told them what the hollow did, who they were, how they spoke in scripture but lived in scars. And when asked what stopped them, she said, nothing stopped them. I just kept walking. One night, near winter, Grace came running, breathless. Calla. They found another chapel, South Ridge, carved into stone, marked with ash. Calla didn't flinch. She just stood, walked to the shelf, took down a map, and marked it. Not with fear, but with purpose. Elijah handed her the hawk pendant. She tied it to her belt. Grace looked up. Are we hunting again? Calla shook her head. No, we're watching. The chapel was empty, ruined, but not dead. Inside they found books, blackened, twisted, charred but bound with fresh thread, and a name scratched into the wall. Rains. Not Calla, just rains, like a warning or a promise. She didn't burn it. She didn't bury it. She left it. She knew now that the hollow was not one man, one gang, or one town. It was a wound, a hunger. But wounds could be closed. And hunger could starve. If no one fed it. When she returned home, she sat beneath the tree she planted first. Fruit hung low, red and round, sweet. A girl from the village came by, carried a notebook. "Are the stories true?" she asked. Calla thought a moment, then said, "All the stories are true, but not all of them are finished." The girl sat, wrote, smiled. Left. That night, Elijah read to her. Not scripture, not history, a story Grace had printed, a fictional one, about a rider with a shadow past who found peace not at the end of a gun, but in planting roots. Calla laughed softly. And whispered, "Liar." Elijah smiled, "Maybe, but a kind one." She leaned against him. And for the first time, didn't feel like she had to wake up fighting, because sometimes survival wasn't about running, or bleeding, or shooting. Sometimes survival was choosing to stay. To plant. To build. To love, even when the world still whispered your name like a curse, because curses could become blessings if someone was brave enough to rewrite them. And Calla Rains was done surviving. She was beginning. At last, the second winter arrived gentler than the first. Snow came late, drifting slow like feathers instead of blades. The wind didn't scream anymore, it hummed. And the cabin, once a place to hide, had become a place to gather, no longer just shelter. It was now a home stitched together by hands that knew pain and chose stillness anyway. Calla stood on the porch, watching the orchard. 10 trees now. One had bent under the weight of its own fruit. She'd leave it that way, proof that even burdened, things could be beautiful. Grace opened the door behind her. "You've got company." Calla turned. "Who?" "Someone with too many questions and not enough sense to keep them." Calla followed her inside. The girl was young, 16 maybe, dirt under her nails, wind in her hair. She sat with her back straight but her eyes down, like she'd memorized strength but hadn't yet claimed it. "My name's June," she said. "I read your words in the black paper, the hollow letters. I know what they did. My uncle, he didn't come back from that place." Calla nodded. "A lot didn't. I want to know how to make sure it doesn't happen again." Grace raised an eyebrow. "You looking for justice or war?" June looked up. "Difference." Calla smiled faintly. "Good question." They didn't send her away. They gave her a room, a knife, and books to read. Grace handed her old journals. Elijah taught her how to mend boots. Calla watched. June learned fast, but not too fast. She stumbled, forgot to sharpen properly, burned a loaf of bread black, fell asleep with a book on her chest. Each mistake softened her, stripped away the tightness around her shoulders. Calla remembered what that felt like, carrying too much too soon, mistaking anger for armor. One afternoon, June came back from town with a letter, addressed to Calla. No sender, just a seal she hadn't seen in a long time, a coiled rope round a circle. She opened it at the table. Inside: a name, a town, a warning. "One of them lives." They changed their face. No signature, but the handwriting was familiar, not hollow. Someone else, someone who had once run with them, or from them. Elijah looked at her. "What's the plan?" Calla folded the letter. "We check." Quietly, Grace sipped her tea. "And if it's true?" Calla's voice didn't rise. "Then we end it." The town was called Cradles and built near a ravine, half crumbled into it already. One road in, one church, 24 houses, a bar that hadn't changed its sign in 30 years. Calla and Elijah rode in with June posing as their niece. Grace stayed behind. Someone had to keep the stories alive if the riders didn't return. They took rooms in the boarding house, watched, waited. Second night, Calla saw him. He was older, beard thick, skin sunburnt, but the walk, the posture, it was him. Dane Holloway, once called Dog-Ear Dane, for the way he listened without blinking, head tilted just enough to unsettle. She followed him to the stable, watched him brush a mare with hands too gentle for his history. She stepped into the light. He froze. Then I wondered how long before a ghost came calling. "Calla didn't draw. You changed your name." "I buried it." She stepped closer. "You ran when it ended." "I stayed to help bury the boys you shot." Calla nodded. "You watched it all happen, never raised a hand." "I was 19. You were breathing." Dane sat on the stool. "You gonna shoot me?" "No, not yet." He looked up. "Then why are you here?" "To ask what you've done with your second chance." He didn't speak for a long time. Then built this town. Took in girls and boys who lost homes. Taught him trade. Gave him names. Never touched a drink. Never raised a hand. Never looked back. Calla watched his eyes. They didn't flinch. She left the stable. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't need to. That night, she told Elijah and June, he's not hollow anymore. He's just a man with the bones of ghosts in his closet. They rode out the next morning. June asked her why she spared him. Calla said, because survival doesn't mean we get to become judges, only witnesses. Then what do witnesses do? We remember, and we write it down, so the next ones can choose better. Back home, Grace had printed a new broadside. Title, What Survived the Fire. It listed not names, not crimes, but lessons. Underlined was one line, let no girl forget her name to be safe. And in spring, when the orchard bloomed brighter than it ever had, Calla planted a single stone beneath the youngest tree. Not a grave, not a warning, just a single word carved in it, begin. The spring thaw didn't just wake the trees, it woke the road. Riders passed through again, traders, messengers, one or two bounty hunters still asking about names Calla hadn't spoken in years. She gave them nothing but water and a place to sleep. The world beyond her fence could keep chasing ghosts. She had other work now. The orchard bore its first full harvest. They gathered the fruit with baskets and laughter. Elijah built crates. Grace wrote stories about each tree, who planted it, when, why. She tacked them to wooden signs and posted them near the roots. Visitors came, sometimes for fruit, sometimes just to walk. Always to read. One girl left a ribbon tied to a branch. Another left a name scratched into bark not her own. A loss, maybe, or a memory. Calla never asked. June grew quieter. Not sullen, just thoughtful. She spent more time out near the high ridge, sketching, listening to wind move through dry grass. One morning, Calla found her there, knees tucked, pages scattered like leaves. You waiting for something? Calla asked. June didn't look up. No, just listening. Calla sat beside her. June said, how do you know when a story's done? Calla smiled. When you stop asking what happens next. In late summer, a child wandered onto the land, alone, no shoes, eyes sharp, didn't speak a word. Grace took her and cleaned her up, offered a bed. Calla watched. Eventually, the girl offered a name, Tess. Didn't explain where she came from, didn't need to. Sometimes survival meant not telling. Sometimes it meant being believed without explanation. Calla believed her. Elijah found an old printing press in a burned-out town 2 valleys over. Took a week to restore it. June ran it. Tess learned to load the plates. Calla edited each page by hand. Grace wrote the headlines. The paper was called the Rains Ledger. It printed once a week. Not for profit. For proof. By fall, their porch had 3 rocking chairs. Calla sat in the middle. Tess curled at her feet, sketching animals she saw in clouds. June read aloud. Not always stories. Sometimes news, sometimes laws, sometimes letters. People wrote them now, not because Calla was famous, but because she'd stayed. One letter came folded in 4, sealed with wax. Inside, to Calla Rains, I heard you survived. I hope you did more than that. I never said sorry. I should have. Before we chose silence over truth, you were right. We made shadows where there should have been light. No signature, just a town name, Stillwater, Calla. Folded it, placed it beside her old revolver. Didn't respond. She didn't need to. Some apologies grew roots without reply. In winter, she planted a row of small pines. Said they were for windbreak, but she planted them in a line, just like markers, just like memory. Tess asked what they were for. Calla said, to hold the wind in place, and that was enough. One night, lightning struck a tree at the edge of the orchard. It burned fast. Too fast. Calla and Elijah got it contained. But in the morning, the tree was gone. June stood beside the blackened earth, holding what was left of the story sign, Tree 3. For what still grows. Calla took it, pressed it into the soil like a stake, then turned to Tess. We'll plant another. You'll name it. Tess smiled. Can I name it after me? No. Calla said gently. Name it for what you want next. They planted the new tree with hands, not tools. No words. No ceremony, only soil and sun and the breath of those who believed in beginning again. And that evening, when the stars broke clean through the sky, Calla sat on the porch, her voice finally soft enough to carry through the quiet. She was left for dead. She whispered, but death couldn't find her. They called that spring the year of blue skies, not for the weather alone, but for what didn't come. No storms, no drought, no riders in black coats stirring old fires, just wind, bees, and the soft sigh of a world learning how to rest. Calla woke each morning before the sun, not because she had to, but because something in her still wanted to greet the quiet before the world moved. She brewed tea, watched the light slide over the orchard, and waited to hear if anyone needed her. Most days, they didn't, and that was the gift. June started painting. Not with brushes or oils. She used ink from the press, smeared it with fingers and water and will. Pages once meant for headlines became scenes, trees growing from old revolvers, birds made of forgotten names, horses running across broken fences. Grace hung them in the ledger office. Tess added her own, small, strange sketches with crooked lines and fierce color. She didn't explain them, just smiled when someone asked, "What's this one about?" Calla always said, "It's about her. That's enough." One afternoon, a wagon arrived, painted red, with peeling letters on the side, "The Silas Show." Curiosities and questions. The man driving wore a blue scarf and too many rings. His voice carried like smoke. "I heard this was a place where stories live," he said. Calla met him halfway down the path. "They do, but not for sale." He tipped his hat. "Never sell, only share." He set up in the field beside the orchard, told tales to children. Some were wild, some were true, some were both. But when he got to one about a girl with fire in her hands and silence in her mouth, Calla stepped forward. "That one's not yours," she said. He nodded. "Then finish." She didn't. She just turned and walked away. And when she looked back, the wagon was gone. In early summer, a letter came postmarked from Stillwater again. This one was shorter. "Calla, thank you for not answering. It told me everything." She burned it without reading it twice. Some chapters didn't deserve rereads. The orchard reached 12 trees. Each with a story. Some written by Grace, some drawn by Tess. One, just a blank sheet nailed to the post with no title at all. June said it was for the ones who hadn't come yet. Calla agreed. That fall, a stranger came on foot, worn boots, scarred jaw, no name given. Said he'd walked from the edge of the territories. Heard this place was safe, needed work. Didn't mind silence. Calla gave him a shovel. He planted turnips and never asked who she'd once been. That's how she knew he could stay. The rains. Ledger expanded. Now it ran dispatches from other women across the counties. Tiny stories. The mayor's son apologized in front of the church, or a girl in East Hollow grew the first sunflower after the mine closed. One line, one truth, one drop of light. The world was still broken, but less, and where it wasn't, they kept planting. Tess asked once, if someone like the Hollow came again, what would we do? Calla paused. Not hide, she said, not run, and not fight the same way. June asked, then how? Calla looked out at the orchard. We'd let them see what they failed to kill, and let that be our answer. They didn't celebrate the anniversary. To loud, to final. But Grace left a paper on every doorstep that day. It read, "You are not what the fire burned. You are what grew back." Calla folded it gently, placed it under a jar with a flower from tree 9, then sat on the porch. She didn't need to say anything, not anymore, because sometimes the loudest legacy was silence. Silence and the sound of wind through leaves that no longer feared fire. And under that blue sky, she closed her eyes. And finally rested. The next spring brought wildflowers. They spilled down the hills like paint from a tilted jar. Purple, yellow, white. Bees danced in clouds. The orchard, once modest, now breathed like a second forest. And in the middle of it all, Calla Raines walked barefoot. No coat, no gun. Just sun on her shoulders and a notebook in her hand. The Ledger's latest edition had been their biggest yet. 30 pages, 5 new contributors, A dispatch from a woman who'd arrested her former captor, a piece from a girl who'd renamed herself and planted a flag in her own name, and one from June, a full page, titled simply, "The Fire Was Never My Fault." Grace printed it without edits. Tess illustrated the border with thorns that turned to vines that bloomed into dandelions. Calla hung it on the inside of the barn door, a private monument. For anyone who still needed it, they began holding circles, not meetings, not sermons, just spaces. Once a week, at dusk, people came. They brought nothing, said what they wanted, or not at all. Sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes someone cried. No one flinched. One woman brought a song passed down from her grandmother. Another taught a child to recite names she never met. A man, graying and heavy with regret, asked if stories could forgive where people couldn't. Calla said yes, because stories bend. And sometimes they healed. One day, a stranger came to the circle, wore a badge polished to bright. Said she worked with the new Marshall Line. Said she'd heard about the orchard. About the paper, about Calla. She didn't ask questions. She asked permission to learn. She said, not to take, just to sit and listen. Calla gave her a chair, and that night when the circle ended, the badge stayed in the grass, untouched. Tess was 12 now, taller, wilder, smarter than all of them. She'd taken to climbing the apple trees and writing poems on the bark with charcoal. She called them her tree prayers. Some were funny, some were sharp. All of them were hers. One read, "I used to dream of fire. Now I just dream." Calla read it twice, then carved it in wood. Hung it over the gate. June started traveling. Once a month, she'd saddle up and ride to the villages that didn't have paper, or teachers, or names they felt safe speaking. She took stories, delivered ones back. She returned sunburnt, saddle sore, and smiling, sometimes bruised, sometimes weeping, but always stronger. Calla never asked what happened out there. She only asked what needed to happen next. June always had an answer. Calla still rose early, still watched the sun touch the orchard like a promise renewed. But now, her notebook wasn't for planning or remembering. It was for fiction. Not the kind that lies, the kind that builds. Stories of girls who ran away from nothing, who built towns out of courage and named them after their sisters. Stories where the ghosts never caught up. Stories where no one had to survive to be believed. One evening, she found Elijah planting seeds in a new plot. Thinking of expanding, she asked. He smiled, thinking of feeding a future I'll never see. She knelt beside him, helped press each seed into the dirt. What should we call it? Elijah wiped his brow. Legacies too heavy. How about shade? Calla nodded. Shade sounds just right. The next circle had no fire, just candles. Each person lit one for someone they hadn't spoken of in years. Not to mourn, to honor. Calla lit hers last. Held the flame steady, then whispered the name she never wrote down, only Elijah heard. And that was enough. The orchard was 17 trees strong now, one for every story not yet finished. They didn't rush them, they let them grow. And in the soft dark of one spring night, when the wind came warm and the moon was full, Calla stood at the center of it all. Not as a legend, not as a ghost, not as the girl who survived, but as the woman who stayed. And from that silence, she whispered, "Now it's your turn." The 17th tree bloomed early. Blossoms broke before the frost had fully gone. Pale pink, fragile-looking things that somehow held firm against the lingering chill. Calla noticed them first thing in the morning. She didn't speak, just ran. Her fingers along the bark, smiled, and returned to her tea. Tess asked why it bloomed sooner than the rest. Calla said, "Some things come back faster. Doesn't mean they heal faster, just means they want to." They got a visitor the next week, a woman with a long braid and shoes made for walking. She carried a bundle of old papers bound by twine and dust. Said she'd been collecting testimonies from towns that no longer existed. Stories pulled from burned archives, whispered names, grave markers with missing dates. She said she'd come to give them to someone who'd know what to do with them. Grace sat up all night cataloging each one. Some were survivors, some were confessions. All of them were true. June took the names, sent copies to every town with a working post. Didn't ask for anything in return. Just sent them out like seeds. Someone'll recognize one. She said, someone'll remember. That's where it begins. Calla didn't touch the bundle for 2 days. When she finally did, it was to find the letter written in a child's hand. A girl named Clara said she remembered fire and a song and someone who told her to hide under a porch until it was over. I think her name was Calla. The girl had written. She had a knife like a bird. I just want her to know I lived. Calla closed the letter. That night, she slept with her window open. Let the orchard wind carry what it wanted. They began carving names again, not on gravestones, on benches, on fence rails, on the sides of crates, wherever something solid could hold. It. Every name not yet given a place got one, not as a warning, but as an anchor. Tess made a map, called it the place of kept names, printed it on the back of the ledger, circulated it across 3 counties. People started sending letters with names to be added. No return addresses, only initials. Calla read every one. By midsummer, the orchard had a path, cut gently between the rows, lined with flat stones. 1 stone for every lesson they didn't learn the first time, another for the ones they still needed to. People started walking it, some quietly, some with prayers. Some left offerings at the base of trees, a lock of hair, a ribbon, a note that said nothing but I'm sorry. Calla let them stay, even the sorrow. Elijah built a bell. Hung it from an old timber arch near the far edge of the orchard. Didn't ring it himself, said it was for those who wanted to mark a moment but couldn't speak. The first to ring it was a boy no older than 7. Didn't say why, just hugged the rope, stepped back, and cried into his mother's coat. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried. All the way to the cabin. Calla stood at the sink, hands in dishwater, and closed her eyes. She didn't ask what it meant. She didn't need to. June rowed out farther than ever before, took a ledger issue to the coast. When she returned, she brought sand in her boots and a map with circles around 5 new places. People are listening, she said, and they're asking how to begin. Calla didn't give her instructions, just handed her a bag of seeds and said, let them plant it their way. One night, Tess asked if Calla believed in God. They were sitting near the tree with the first ribbon, watching the moon tilt. Calla took her time, then said, I believe in choice, and I believe in what we do with what we survive. Tess nodded. Then said, I think that's close enough. There was a fire in a distant town, not the hollow, just a barn struck by lightning. But the people remembered what it felt like to be afraid, and they wrote. Sent word for guidance. Grace published a reply, simple, short, build again. Don't ask permission, build again. The orchard's 18th tree came from a seed Elijah had kept in his pocket for years. He never said why. Just planted it one day, smiled, then whispered something to the roots. Calla didn't ask. Some legacies are better when left to grow wild. And under a sky more blue than any spring before it. The tree took root. And so did they all. In silence. In wind. In story. In peace. By the time the orchard reached 20 trees, the path between them had worn into the ground like a riverbed. Boots, bare feet, hooves, wheels all left their mark. The soil remembered every visit. Calla liked to walk it before sunrise, not to pray, not to think, just to listen. The trees made a kind of music she never heard anywhere else. Not wind, not rustle, something like breathing, like the past sighing into rest. The ledger ran a special issue that fall, front to back, nothing but names. No stories, no explanations. Just names. Some were etched in memory, some were new, some had never been spoken aloud until now. The cover was a drawing by Tess, a hand reaching down into the dirt, another reaching up through it, meeting at the wrist. She titled it, We Pulled Each Other Out. It was the first edition to sell. Out in every town. Letters kept coming. One from a girl in a northern mining town. I can't leave, but I'm teaching my brother what I know now. Is that enough? Calla wrote back, it's more than enough. It's the beginning. They built a second bell, this one smaller, tuned higher. Tess called it the welcome bell. It was rung when someone arrived, when they chose to stay, or when they chose to leave and promised to carry the work forward. It rang 13 Times in the first month. June came back from the coast with a wagon. Not full of goods. Full of girls. They had eyes like splinters and backs too straight for their age. No one asked what they'd run from, only what they needed. They needed space, warmth, silence, tools. Calla gave them the press. Make something true, she said. And they did. A new pamphlet, How to Stay Free, printed in their words, their way. Calla only edited for spelling. That winter, a fever swept a neighboring town. Calla, Elijah, and Grace rode out with medicine and blankets. They stayed for 2 weeks. Nursed 37 people. Buried 2. One woman, delirious in fever, gripped Calla's hand and whispered, "They told me I was dead. I never was. I never was." Calla held her until the fever broke. Then told her, "You're not dead. You're just beginning." They came home in time to see the 19th tree bloom early. A second tree had followed the first. June said, "They're learning from each other." Tess said, "Just like us." Calla said nothing, but she watered both. The next circle they held. They passed stones instead of speaking. Each person held one, then passed it. No words, just wait. Grace explained after, "Sometimes, what we carry doesn't need to be named, only shared." They did it again the next week. And every week after. One day, a man from a distant county arrived. Said he was from a place where the hollow had never come. But something worse had. A silence wrapped in law. Said he needed a new kind of gospel. One that told the truth. He asked for a press. Calla handed him the one they'd restored last year. "It's heavy," she warned. He said, "Good." So was the lie. They received word the following month that in Stillwater, a woman had reclaimed her land, built a school, named it the Rains School for Returning. Calla read the letter twice, then hung it beside the very first broadsheet ever printed. Tree 20 came from a girl none of them knew. She arrived with a satchel and a seed wrapped in velvet. Said, "I heard this is where things grow." Calla nodded. They planted it at the orchard's edge. Gave it no sign. Just space. That night, around the fire, Elijah told his story. Not of fire or vengeance or loss, but of a town with no name, where peace didn't need permission, and where every door stayed open. At the end, he asked, "Do you think that place could exist?" Calla looked at the orchard. At Tess asleep with her head on June's lap, at the wind that whispered without fear, and said, "It already does." The 20th tree stood taller than all the rest, not by much but just enough to catch the light first every morning. Calla began waking before even the birds, not out of duty, but something else, something quieter, a pull, like the trees. Roots had grown into her bones. She would walk the path barefoot now. Her soles knew every stone, every rise in the soil. The wind kissed the orchard with the kind of reverence one usually reserved for temples. She smiled more these days, not because the work was done, but because it kept growing. The girl who planted tree 20 never gave her name. She stayed 2 weeks, helped mend the roof of the barn, read every edition of the Rains ledger front to back, then left with a satchel twice as full and a new map inked on her wrist. Before leaving, she handed Tess a folded note. Tess read it, then burned it, didn't cry, didn't explain. Calla didn't ask. But that night, Tess sat closer than usual. And Calla put her arm around her without a word. Grace announced she would be stepping back from the press. Not retiring, just making space. "I've told the stories I needed to," she said. "Now it's time I learn some new ones." June took over as head editor. Her first issue ran a headline across the top, "Freedom isn't a moment, it's a muscle." Calla smiled when she read it. A man from the territories came to study the orchard, called it an experiment in social recovery, took notes on paper far too clean, asked questions like, "How did you quantify the trauma?" Calla handed him a basket of apples and told him to sit by the bell until he understood. He left. By morning, didn't take the apples. Tess used them for pie, said, "That's what we do with fruit no one else knows how to use." There was a birth that spring. A woman from 3 towns over arrived swollen and scared. Calla had never delivered a baby before. Grace had. Tess held the lantern. Elijah stood outside, carving wood like prayer. The child came into the world loud and strong. The mother wept for a long time after, then named the child River. Because she came from something too deep to drown, she said. Calla held the baby, kissed her forehead, whispered, "You are the beginning, not the end." They added a line to the map. The orchard isn't a place, it's a practice. People began planting trees in their own towns. One girl wrote, "We don't have much, but I named mine after the first time I said no and meant it." Calla carved that into a bench. A trader brought books one week. Old ones, worn covers, spines held together by prayer. Calla found a volume of poetry with a margin note that read, "Who survives the fire isn't always who enters it." She closed the book, then reopened it and read every poem aloud. Tess fell asleep listening. June drew circles in the dirt. Grace just watched the sky. No one spoke for a long while after. One morning, they heard the welcome bell ring twice. A woman and her son stood at the gate. She said, "We read your paper. We followed the path. We don't have anything to offer." Calla said, "Are you breathing?" The woman nodded. Calla smiled. "Then you brought everything." The boy planted a sapling. Didn't name it. Didn't need to. They called it Tree 21. That summer, Calla finally wrote down her own story. Not the version others whispered. Not the one told in legend. Just the truth, quiet and plain. She didn't write it for publication. She left it under her bed, wrapped in linen, sealed with twine, a letter on top, addressed to no one. Just a sentence: "You can survive and still grow soft." June rode farther again, this time with 3 girls. They didn't plan to return soon. They had presses to build, towns to reach, circles to start. Calla hugged them each. Didn't cry until after they left. Elijah sat with her in the quiet, held her hand, didn't say a word. By season's end, the orchard's path had split, a fork in the dust, one side leading toward the hills, the other back to town. Calla carved a sign and placed it at the fork. No arrows, no instructions. Just one word: choose, because that's all it ever was. Not vengeance, not destiny, choice. And in the stillness that followed the wind, the trees echoed back every footstep with grace. Calla kept walking.